Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Coast-to-Coast Combat Hour. I'm your host, Matthew Hawkins, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Ed Carbajal. And on a weekly basis, we are brought to you by allaccessmma.com. Check out allaccessmma.com for any of your MMA news and our video podcast. This week, we have the pleasure to have one of the great voices of combat sports in the United States, and somebody whose voice is just synonymous with MMA for me, and I know Ed, Sean Wheelock. Sean, thank you for joining us.
Hey, Matt. Hey, Ed. Thanks so much for having me on, guys. I appreciate it.
So, given your seniority in the sport and how long you've been doing everything, I mean, again, before we started recording, I already know I was fanboying up, and I'm still going to get it out of my system as we do the interview. But
I appreciate it.
We were talking about the posters and stuff in the background. I mean, is your connection with Art Davie like the way you got into your career essentially, or like what gave you the fight sports bug to do what you do?
No, so the Art Davie story, well, I'll tell you. I'll back up. So I'm from Kansas. I actually live in the suburb where I grew up. I live about 15 minutes from the house I grew up. I was with my mom earlier today. I live in a Kansas City suburb called Shawnee, Kansas. And when you grow up in a state like Kansas, you're exposed to wrestling. You just do folk style in gym class in grade school and junior high. It's just something you do. And I also was exposed to a phenomenal pro wrestling territory. I'm just old enough to have caught the end of the territory days, the Central States days. Throw that in with the fact I was raised by my mom, but my late father, who I would see at least once a week, was from New York. He was a big boxing fan. And my dad was about a generation older than my mom. So my dad was old enough to have told me about Rocky Marciano and Sugar Ray Robinson. And I spent a lot of Friday nights at my dad's, and we watched a lot of boxing, and that really got me into it. So I kind of had this blend to be a combat sports fan. You know, I loved pro wrestling. I was around wrestling. I loved boxing. I was never a tough kid by any means. And even though I've been doing MMA and grappling for a long time, by no means I'm a tough guy. But I've always been attracted to combat sports. As a competitor, as a fan, it's just something that's always spoken to me. So in October of 1993, I started seeing this poster. It's actually not the poster, but I think it is the poster. Yeah, it is. It's that poster behind me. That's right. That's the Gold's Gym poster, the UFC 1 poster, the exclusive on pay-per-view. And I see this poster, and I'm like, man, this sounds like the coolest thing ever. And I was kind of aware in the periphery of something called shoot fighting. And I'd read about some stories in Japan, and I'd heard names like Bas Rutten and Bart Vale and the Shamrock Brothers, and I wasn't quite sure what it was. And I remember reading an article that said it's like real pro wrestling. Well, I was hooked. So I see this poster at Gold's Gym in Kansas City, and I'm like, okay, this is great. So I was young enough that I still didn't have the money. I asked my mom, and she was like, yeah, no problem. We didn't grow up with a lot of money, and my mom was a public school art teacher. She's retired now. I'm her only kid. So we didn't have a lot of money. But if I asked for my mom to buy me a Holyfield fight or a Tyson fight or a WrestleMania, she always would without question. And so I asked her to pay the $14.95, and I watched UFC 1, and man, I was hooked. You know, there were a few life-changing moments, and that was a life-changing moment for me. You like to talk about the birth of your children and when you meet your spouse and things like that. But that was a life-changing moment for me. The next day, I wanted to put someone in a guard, and I wasn't sure what that was. And I was absolutely hooked. So at a very long way to get to your question. So in 2011, I don't know why, but I just started thinking about, man, I have to meet Art Davie. And I was calling people. And a lot of people were confusing him with Campbell McLaren, which is unfortunate, or Bob Meyerowitz, which is unfortunate. And he was just kind of gone from the game. And I'm a decent Google researcher. So I start doing my Google research, and I find this press release, and it has a 702 number on it. I'm like, okay, well, that's Vegas. I know that. At least it's Nevada. It's probably Vegas. And I cold call this 702 number. The voice answered. I'm like, hello, is this Mr. Davie? Yes. Hey, my name is Sean Wheelock. You don't know me, but I'm the television commentator for Bellator. And we got into it, and I really just called to tell him thank you and that I was a fan, and I appreciate everything he did, and I wouldn't have the career I did without him.
Wow.
And we hit it off. And we talked the next day, and we talked the next day, and that's coming up on 9 years in July, and we've pretty much spoken every day since.
That's amazing.
That's great. And it's funny thing is, I think we're all kind of in the same age group, probably early to mid 40s. I'm just guessing. And so many people in our age group have kind of the same stories. You just took it to that next level. My story I've told a million times. I saw Mark Hall train for UFC 7, got in the car, drove 40 miles north, no cell phones, knocked on his door, found his phone, pay phone, knocked on his door, ended up training bare knuckle fighting.
That's amazing.
With a UFC fighter. Yeah. So that's how I got involved and stuff. But hearing you how you went, I mean, Art Davie's another level. I found a fighter who was local. You went to like the Grand Poobah of the, short of going to Jorge and Gracie directly or somebody, you basically went to it. So, you contacted him, but weren't you didn't you do some boxing refereeing or judging, or was that?
Yeah, no, that's years ago, man. So I started training boxing a little bit, and I was decidedly mediocre, which has kind of been my whole combat sports career. I pride myself on being the world's most mediocre grappler. I'm not bad and I'm not good. I'm very, very mediocre. And I was a pretty mediocre boxer, and I kind of fell in with the boxing crowd around Kansas City. And there was a promoter named Randy Cook, and this is in the 90s. And it's just before commissions started getting going. Missouri had a commission, but a state like Kansas, where I live, I'm on the Kansas side in Kansas City, didn't have an athletic commission. So promoters really ran the show. And he was like, hey, you want to fight for me? And I'm like, yeah, maybe. What does it pay? And he goes, $200. And he said, or you could referee for me. What does that pay? $50. I'm like, I'm not very good at boxing. I might win, I might lose. I'm probably going to get my face smashed even if I win. But if I referee, now I can keep coming back and back and back. So literally, and I think I was 22 years old. I had no training other than being a lifelong boxing fan. And I'm thrown in and I'm refereeing fights, which is insane, pre-commission days. And I loved it. And I've always taken things extremely seriously. If I'm interested, I'm going to do everything to the best of my ability. And I tried so hard. And I was a lifelong boxing fan, so I understood the mechanics of what a referee does, having never been trained. But I started refereeing, and I refereed a lot. And I wound up refereeing in Missouri. I refereed Nebraska. I refereed in Arkansas on the old Midwest circuit. And that got me into it. And I loved refereeing, and I started judging. And when my television career started getting going, now I'm doing fights on the weekends. And that was kind of the end of my officiating career. But then 7 years ago, I got a call from the Kansas Department of Commerce, and they told me there was a seat coming up on the athletic commission. Would I be interested? And the first thing I said is, you know what I do for a living? I was at Bellator at the time because I didn't know about conflict of interest. And they said, no, that's why we're calling you. There aren't a lot of people from Kansas who are involved. And I said, well, if you pay me, I'm trying to be magnanimous. I said, well, if you pay me, I'm going to have to recuse, playing it cool. And they're like, no, we don't pay. I'm like, okay, well, good. That's not a problem then. And so I wound up being appointed. That's not a diploma, by the way. I'm a college dropout. That's my Kansas commission thing. So my wife framed that for me. I'm not really one to brag. So I think that's all of my memorabilia. Those are like the three important things outside of my family, my life. UFC 1, BKFC 1, my commission appointment from the governor of Kansas. But I want to do anything and everything in combat sports. And just last Saturday, I was working my commission gig. And a lot of people see me there and they think I'm commentating. I say, no, this is my lucrative non-paying gig. I really love it. I just want to be around. I want to help. I don't referee or judge anymore for the simple reason that I don't want to take away paying work from our people in Kansas. But if I'm not commentating, I'm pretty much going to be somewhere in the state of Kansas working for the commission. And it's just overseeing. It's helping out where you can. Being on an athletic commission is a lot like, not that I've ever done this, but a lot like being on the board of directors of a not-for-profit. It's kind of what you make of it. You're not going to get paid. You were there. And if you're really into it like I am, you can get a lot out of it. And if you're just there to build your resume, then that's what you're going to do too.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually one of the questions I was going to ask you about how you got appointed. So thank you for telling us about that. You kind of touched on something as far as like your love for combat sports and martial arts and things like that. I mean, you work with so many people. I've spoken to him. He's actually out here in Jersey. I feel like the answer is yes. Did you work with Josh Palmer for like grappling stuff too?
No, I know Josh. I've met him a couple of times. We've just kind of run parallel universes, but I've never actually worked. No, I think Josh does a fantastic job. Super knowledgeable, really good commentator. I've just never actually worked with Josh. I'd like to.
Yeah,
It'd be fun to do grappling. I've done grapplings. I did Quintet 3 with Misha Tate, which was the first quintet in the U.S. It was in Vegas, and I believe October 2018, I believe. And until the pandemic, I was doing every Submission Underground with Nate Quarry, which was so much fun because I'm such a grappling nerd.
Yeah.
And Nate's such a cool guy, and working for Chael's son. And unfortunately, with the pandemic, Chael has not been able to bring us out even now, a year on. But Nate and I were actually talking right after Triller. He called me like, man, we got to get back to it. So, Josh is a cool guy. He does a great job. And I miss having a regular grappling series. I have one. It's just Chael's doing those remotely right now, and I know he really doesn't want to commentate his own show. So I'm waiting to get back for Submission Underground.
Yeah, I love Submission Underground, but the reason I asked about Palmer was because just talking about, like, he's also I think he's like a 2nd degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But I mean, when you're talking about fighting and stuff, he just about your own. We're all too old for the sport now, but he and I, when we spoke about it afterward, we both said, as long as you've been training and you do something to stay in shape, we're just hobbyists compared to these competitors that you're calling the fights for and stuff like that. And I think just what you do just speaks to your love for what these guys are putting on the line out there, which is I guess leading me to my question about when you collaborated with the book for Art Davie. I mean, was it more kind of like him having you do editing, or I mean, like how do you collaborate with someone that's like the pioneer or your catalyst into, you know what I mean? Like, I'm just wondering what did you do to help to get that book out?
It's a great question, and you're a writer yourself. So I think this will speak to you. So, as I was saying, I really thought if I ever got Art Davie on the phone, I thought it was going to be a conversation. Even though I was the commentator of Bellator at the time, this was 2011, and I'd already done Pride and Affliction and M1. I'm still fanboying out on him big time. I really just called for no other reason, just to tell him thank you. I just wanted to speak to the great Art Davie, and we hit it off. So Art and I start talking a lot. And that was at a time in 2011. Our younger daughter, Hadley, had been born on a day before my birthday, actually, March 17th.
Oh, wow.
And so my wife was going to bed very early. Our older daughter, Ellie, was 5, just turning 6 that summer. So the family was going to bed early those nights. So I was calling Art a lot, 10, 11. We were talking, and I saw that he wanted to tell stories, and no one had really asked him in a long time. And he had really, in 2011, he'd basically been out of the game since about 1997. And I can talk about the chronology on that in a bit. We just started talking, and I literally asked him every question I ever wanted to know. Why Denver? Why Royce Gracie and not Hickson? Where did you find these guys? Why an Octagon? How did you get with Hickson and Henzo Gracie? And every question that I could think of. Why Semaphore Entertainment Group? Why did you sell? How much did you sell for? Where did you find John McCarthy? All of these questions. And maybe 6 or 8 months, I just kind of had the idea, and I said, Art, you know what? You and me ought to do a book. He was like, yeah, he said, I've been approached before, but I'm thinking, we should do a book. So the original idea we came up for the book, which became Is This Legal, is that I was going to do an oral history. So I was going to talk to Art. I was going to talk to McCarthy. I was going to talk to Hickson and Royce and all. I mean, I would talk to Hoyler, right? I would talk to the fighters who were there, the 8 plus the 2 alternates. Both Kevin Rozier and Pat Smith were still alive at this time. So all 10 of the original guys were living. Bob Marowitz. But I thought, okay, well, I'm going to start with Art. As Art's telling me the stories, it occurred to me that all roads lead to Art Davie. Art Davie found the Gracies. Art Davie found Campbell McLaren and Bob Meyerowitz and John McCarthy and the fighters. And I said, Art, we need to change the focus. This needs to be a memoir. I said, this is your story. And I said, we'll make it historically accurate, and we'll make it correct, and we'll fill in the blanks. But I want this to be a memoir. And that's what Is This Legal turned out to be.
Wow. Well, that's one that
I'll answer one more question too, because this is a really writery thing. The process, I don't even like the term ghostwriting because I think that's unfair. Art wrote a lot, and I wrote a lot. And he would send stuff to me and I would rewrite it. And then I would send stuff to him and he would rewrite it. And it came to the point where even now when I look at the book, it came out in 2015. I can't remember what I wrote and he wrote. We like literally, it was a 100% collaboration. He would write things and I would say, no, I think this is it, or we need to change this narrative. I would write stuff and he would say, no, that didn't happen that way, or this or that. And we started to think like each other. I knew I was in deep when I actually woke up one morning. This is a true story. And I dreamt that I'd been writing the book. That's how immersed I was into it. I took a time when, if you guys remember, Bellator was in seasons then.
Yeah.
And I took a Bellator off season and I was writing 10, 11, 12 hours a day on this.
Oh, wow.
And sending it back to Art, and he was writing and back and forth. And that became the book. Now, I will tell you guys, which is really cool, is that we had sold an option on the book in 2017. And, you know, it's film and things go slow. And I'm an optimist by nature, but you can't get overly optimistic, get unrealistically optimistic. But the producer we sold it to sold it to a major studio. So,
oh, wow.
Knock on wood, it's going to be a pretty big film. They have 2 screenwriters. They have a pretty big name director. So it's going to be, I think, if everything comes to fruition, I'll knock on wood one more time. I think it's going to be a pretty cool movie.
Oh, wow. That's great. I mean, I now you make me feel bad for not having, I read it. I read Raw Combat.
I'll get you a copy, pal.
Thanks. But I've read Raw Combat. Like there's a lot of books about the beginnings of MMA and combat sports that I have read. I mean, Matt and I had the author for the Pride, the name's escaping my mind, Matt, the author we had from Ireland that wrote about the history of Pride fighting championships, literally in the other room. But and then Raw Combat, because Jim Jenia, who kind of like helped me, you know, get into the writing business out here in the Northeast. But that's all super interesting stuff. I'm sorry, I'm jumping on Matt's question, but
no, not at all.
Yeah, it's just I mean, you gave me a lot, and that's definitely really motivating.
No, I think we're gonna have to have a part 2 to this eventually because there's so much that So I don't want to backtrack too much, but so I'll ask a quick question here, and then I got a second question about commissions real quick. Anything from Art Davie? You start talking about throwing out all those early names, asking about where he met all these guys. Is there anything from the first 5 UFCs or so that he told you that maybe not a lot of people would know? Any weird fact or a fighter that wasn't allowed? I mean, I'm sure there's a million, but anything that jumps in your head?
It's all in the book. And here's the thing. And I said to Art going on, I mean, look, I'm not a journalist. I'm the first one to say I'm not a journalist. I'm a guy who talks about people getting hit in the head on TV. I'm a commentator. I'm not a journalist, and I respect real journalists. You know, you guys are real journalists in all honesty, and I'm not. But I've been around real journalists, such as the 2 of you guys. I kind of know what real journalists do. So I said to Art, I said, look, this is a memoir, and everybody sees events through their own perspective. But at the same time, there's never really been, Clyde Gentry had a really good book, right? But there's never really been that true story of how the UFC came about.
That was No Holds Barred, right?
Yeah, No Holds Barred. And it touched on it. McCarthy's book is fantastic, and John McCarthy is one of my best friends. He actually read the manuscript. I only showed it to a couple of people, and John gave me some fantastic notes. I knew I had something when John said, Sean, I remember we were at Bellator and we were at Mohegan, and it was the day before and we were walking into weigh-ins. John was reffing, I was commentating. He said, Sean, I felt like Art was speaking to me off of the page. And this is someone who's known Art since 1992. So I knew I had something on the book. But I said to Art, okay, it's a memoir, but this is going to be fact because simultaneously, this is the historical record. I said, so this isn't going to be a victory lap. I told him flat out, I said, Art, I love you. And I do really love Art Davie. He's like my dad. But I'm not going to write your victory lap. You know, I'm not going to write your coronation. We're going to write the real story because the truth about the UFC, it was destined to fail. It was not destined to succeed. The biggest surprise for me was how many people were against it. And maybe, you know, I've got my BKFC 1 poster behind me and I see how many people are against bare knuckle fighting 28 years later. So I shouldn't be surprised. But so many people were against MMA. They called it dirty fighting.
Yeah.
They were linking it to traditional martial arts, saying it was a disgrace. It was the ruinization of Western civilization. You know, it's famous or infamous with John McCain saying it was human cockfighting.
Yeah.
But you had Jim Coleman, who was the editor of Black Belt Magazine, running an editorial saying it was dirty fighting. It's amazing the amount of people who said no. Art wanted to get a high-level American wrestler, either from freestyle or collegiate folk style or Greco. Kept calling Dan Gable. Dan Gable, to this day, has never returned Art Davie's phone call. You know, he went through people like Dennis Alexio and Bart Vale, who were purported tough guys who just, not for me, and wouldn't even give him an answer. Talked to so many boxers, from Leon Spinks to Bone Crusher Smith to Randall Tex Cobb. So many people didn't just say no thank you graciously. It was like, this is the worst idea I've ever heard. You're a horrible human being. You're bringing a disgrace on the entire Western, or perhaps the world, civilization. That was a real surprise to me. It wasn't just Art was starting with an idea and trying to build up. He was starting with an idea. Everyone pushed him down. He had to get back to level before he could build up.
Interesting. Well, real quick, just to backtrack to the commission thing so I don't forget it. So Kansas has pretty much been on the lead for kind of open scoring. Did you? What is your opinion on that? I guess, and would you? I mean, I guess your opinion is going to tell the story, but did you have a big say in creating that in the Kansas? Was it was it your idea, or was it somebody else's idea, or was it just a collaboration that came up?
So I'll tell you the structure of Kansas. So we have an executive director, that's Adam Rohrbach, who's one of my best friends. And I didn't know Adam until he was appointed. He got hired, and then I was appointed, I think, within a couple of months later. We hit it off immediately. We're about the same age. You know, I'm a Kansas guy. He's an Indiana guy. Just really hit it off. What I like about Adam is he knows what he knows, and he knows what he doesn't know. Adam comes to combat sports from collegiate softball. He was a softball coach. He was actually at the University of Kansas before he took the Kansas Athletic Commission job. So he still, even though he's been in the job now, I think 8 years, he still has a little bit of an outsider's perspective, which I like. So Adam comes up with all these ideas all the time. And when I'm not commentating like I did last Saturday in Olathe, Kansas, when I was at a Pro-Am MMA show, I'm sitting next to Adam at the commission table. Adam throws ideas at me all the time. And I just like, Adam, dude, that's the worst idea I've ever heard. And maybe a year and a half ago, he said, you know, we ought to do open scoring. And I said, you know, man, they've done that. And I said, I've actually commentated a number of boxings in Mexico because the WBC has played with it. I'm like, dude, they announced it to the crowd. You can't hear it. And he's like, yeah, I don't care about any of that. And he didn't even know what I was talking about. He said, but I think we need to do it. And I fell back in this argument. I pride myself, guys, on being extremely open-minded, but I fell back into my argument. Yeah, but, you know, the fighter who's mathematically ahead is going to take off the last round. I'll get to that in a minute, how wrong I was. Then we're at an Invicta. And, you know, I don't commentate Invicta. I was at Invicta just working the commission. We're at the commission table. Goes into the 5th round of a title fight. And Adam and I are privy to the scorecards. They're not made public at this point. And we see that it's 2 rounds apiece. And Adam said, how great would it be if these two fighters knew that it was 2 rounds apiece and that the winner wins this fight? I'm like, dude, you're right. And it opened that up for me. I'm like, I remember us walking out of the building together to our cars at Memorial Hall in Kansas City, Kansas. I'm like, bro, you're right. So then where I'll take credit on is the implementation. I said, Adam, you have the idea, but we can't look like idiots running around. We have such a great commission now. We can't turn into a clown show. So we figured this out. Adam came up with Google Docs. We talked about pad holders. And I said, you know, this really isn't for us to give the fighters. This is to give their corners. If the corners want to give it to their fighters, cool. But what I don't want to do is have someone with a pad right in front of the fighter. I mean, they have enough going on. Now they've got to figure out a jumble of, am I 38 or am I 36? Am I red or blue? Who's 10 and who's 8 and who's 9? And, you know, that's not easy for a lot of people, especially if you're in the midst of a very competitive pro or amateur MMA fight, or we've expanded all combat sports in Kansas, but any type of combative sports fight. I said, you know, we need this for the coaches, the chief seconds, the trainers. They want to give it to their fighter, great, but it's their information. That's how they use it. we have inspectors in the corner of Kansas. And we thought, you know what, the inspectors are there for a very specific reason. We don't need them holding the pad, but we don't need two people in there holding the pad. And you're getting in the way of the cut man and the chief second and all of this. So I came up on the idea, let's park that person with a tablet, with an iPad, outside of the ring ropes, outside of the cage. So they're on the floor to the back of the fighter, holding the pad up, and it's direct eyesight with the trainer / coach / chief second. And that's what we've done. It works. Now, here's the crazy part. Every fighter loves it. That's not so crazy. But that argument, which I still hear, the fighter who statistically, mathematically is ahead will take the last round off. We've compiled data. In open scoring in Kansas, the percentage of fighters who statistically are up and can only lose by being finished. So, for instance, you would be up, right? You would be up 2-0 to none, 2018, going into the third round, or that type of thing, right? Statistically, you have the advantage. The percentage of those fighters who mathematically have won unless they get finished, winning the final round has gone up. So on a house show in Olathe, Kansas last week, it was a 5-round, promotional title fight. It was a pro, smaller level promotion house show. The kid was up. He had won rounds 2, 3, and 4, 10-8. He had won round 1, 10-9. Wow. He still 10-8's his opponent in round 5. Wow. And he knew the score. Wow. Chris Lytle, what who's turned into one of my best friends in the world, my great broadcast partner on BKFC, said anybody who thinks that a fighter will take the last round off, even if they know they're winning, has never fought. And that's so true, because when I hear people say, the fighter who's winning will take the last round off, they're never a fighter who says that. Yeah. It's been universally loved. There's still a lot of people, a lot of commissioners say, it's terrible. It's the worst idea. It doesn't do this and that. Fighters love it. And that's truthfully all we care about.
What's funny, as you were talking about it, I remember, I'm pretty sure it was Roy Jones Jr. when they asked about, this was like back when, boxing was the thing to watch on Saturday night on HBO, like in the 90s. And he was still active, he was in his prime, but he also, if you remember back then, he did commentary too a lot. And I remember, I forget where or why it came up, but I remember when he was asked about it, he said, he was like, I don't need that. It's a distraction to me. I don't need that on my mind in the middle of my match. And that's kind of like, because of him, I was a big fan of his. That's kind of like where I was. It sounds like you were kind of there too, but like you said, being open. Yeah.
So I'll give you 2 examples of that. And this is why it's for the trainer. And I'm a big believer that the person in your corner, depending on the combat sport, you call the coach, trainer, chief second, right? But it's the person in your corner. That's your number one advocate. Mm-hmm. They need to be there for you. So we do a BKFC October of last year, and we have the open scoring. So David Rickles, my buddy David Rickles, all the way back from the Bellator days, in his corner is Joe Wilk. I'm very close to both Rickles and Wilk. Wilk was my broadcast partner at Victory on Fight Pass. So I talked to Wilk afterwards and about the open scoring, because I never told Rickles. I said, why not? He goes, dude, I want him to go on finish. He was fighting Cliff Wright because Rickles was piling up 10-8s, didn't lose a round, but he was doing that psychology. And he wanted Dave Rickles to finish. Now, he should have known that Dave Rickles will fight as hard as he can, no matter if he's up, down. He could be up 99 rounds to 0, and he's still trying to finish. Well, that's interesting. Same card, Joey Beltran is fighting Marcel Stamps for the heavyweight title. And so through 3 rounds, 2 of our 3 judges have it 30-27 Beltran. The third has it 29-28.
No, they had it for Stamps.
I mean, for Stamps. I beg your pardon. For Stamps, correct, 100%, right. 3 rounds to none, 3 rounds to none, 2 rounds to 1, 30-27, 30-27, 29-28, all for Stamps. 5-round fight, right? Bare knuckle. Afterwards, I'm talking to Beltran. He said, I really felt that I had won the 3rd round. And when I looked and I saw that all 3 judges had me losing that, he thought, man, it's go time. He said that changed the way I fought. And he came out and he finished Stamps in the 4th round. When is it bad to give somebody information?
Yeah.
Why is that bad? Why is it secret? Why are people always so protective? I just heard today, actually, from Adam Rohrbach, someone was trying to get the scorecards, and I don't even know what sport it was, a promotion in Illinois. Mm-hmm. And the Illinois Commission said you need to file a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request. It's like, really? Yeah. For scorecards? You know what we do in Kansas? We have them on Google Docs. We tweet them out round by round. if you're hiding something, there's probably a reason. Maybe you're embarrassed or you're not proud of it or something. File a FOIA request. So we put it out. And, for people like Roy Jones, if Roy says to his trainer, I don't want to know the score, then he's never going to see it. And we've never had this, but if the corner said, you know what, we don't even want that distraction, we're not sending our pad holder over there. Now, I can tell you in hundreds of fights with open scoring, that has never happened, but it's the option. They don't have to have it. Open scoring is a tool. So we've only had one UFC in Kansas. That was Wichita in 2019. Yeah, 2019, March 2019. But if the UFC or anybody else said we don't want open scoring, that's fine. I like to think, they're very liberal commissions and they're very conservative commissions. We're a very libertarian commission. We're a small government commission. Hey, we have open scoring. If you want to use it, cool. If you don't want to use it, that's cool too. We're not going to tell you how to run your fights.
Yeah, Roy Jones probably didn't have much in the 90s. He was always up 10 rounds to none.
Yeah,
anyway,
exactly. Well, and I can tell you firsthand, having commentated a lot of boxing and WBC shows and even WBC world title fights in Mexico, I speak functional Spanish, but they'll announce the scorecards after rounds 4 and 8. And in the ring announcer who's seated, not in the ring, is reading it. People are cheering. It's really tough to hear. So, and it's very fast, whether it's English or Spanish. And my Spanish is good enough that I can pick up the numbers, but it's still tough to hear. But our thing is, it's for the corners, what they want to do to their fighters. Promotions have the option if they want their ring/cage announcer to read it to the crowd. Surprisingly, they generally do not. I'm not sure why that is. I think they want to build the drama. But again, that's up to the promoter. It's our libertarian bent as a commission. With BKFC, we have all the Invictus in Kansas. We had a good run. I think we had 8 or 9 LFAs during the pandemic. They did a residency at Hartman Arena in Wichita, and they've used it round by round. And broadcasters seem to love it. Television producers, it gives them another tool. I can tell you as a commentator, it was fun to commentate that. And Chris Lidle and I could play off of rather than speculating. Okay, now how does this change the strategy? It's a really cool tool. And that's what it is. It's a tool in the tool shed. Pick it up and use it or don't. But we're the only commission in the ABC that has that option.
Well, one of the things, my degree's in communications. And I remember one of my communication electives I had to take was managerial communication. And one of the no-nos of communication for that course was don't withhold information.
Right.
So 100%. I agree with you with what you said about when is it bad to not give it out?
Yeah,
it's not. And so far with every time we watch an event where open score is in, I haven't seen online. I'm always live tweeting on Twitter and all that stuff. Everyone loves it. Everybody.
Yeah, people do. So the arguments that I've heard against it, there were basically 3. And I already told you about the argument. The person mathematically, statistically ahead isn't going to fight. The numbers have said that the opposite happens. They're actually winning that final round more. So that's one. So there's zero merit in that argument. Again, talk to any fighter. Those are people who are around fighting. They're usually executive directors or athletic commissioners who don't know what they're talking about. Second one is, well, this isn't going to fix bad judging. Yeah, no kidding. Seatbelts aren't going to fix bad driving either. It has nothing to do with anything. What it does is that it puts the judges even more accountable instantly.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, when I got on the athletic commission, there were people, and they were good people, who just did not keep up with their training, who are no longer referees, judges, timekeepers, inspectors in the state of Kansas, because they did not keep up with their continual education. If you watch an MMA from 1998, the fighting looks a lot different, but there are still people who try to referee and judge like it's 1998.
Oh my God!
So you have to move. So to fix bad judging was nonsensical to me. It wasn't even, that was never even a part of it. It's to give the score. In team sports, you give the score. In the NBA playoffs, you can see that it's 82-78. That's not there to fix bad officiating. It's there to tell you the score if you're winning or losing, and maybe to make your adjustments to your strategy. The third argument, and I still cannot figure this one out. People say, well, the judge who's the dissenting judge, he's going to know, and now he's going to try to play catch up. And I'm like, All right, how does this work? So after round 1, 2 of the judges have it 10-9 red, and you go 10-9 blue. And first of all, if you're that insecure, you probably shouldn't be a professional combat sports judge. But let's say you are hypothetically. So now you go 10-9 red, but then they go 10-9 blue, and you're still playing catch up. So, scorecards, at least in good commissions like Kansas, are turned in round by round. So it's not as though people can go, hey, wait a minute, that round 1? Well, I need to change that. Once your score, it's like a vote, man. Once your scorecards are in, they're in. There's no going back. They're turned in every round. So I've tried very hard, and some pretty smart people have told me that. Well, the judge who's in the minority and the dissent they're going to then be influenced and try to change. But unless, right, Matt, you're shaking your head, right?
Yeah,
unless you're psychic and you say, okay, well, Mike Bell and Sal D'Amato had it 10-9 Jones in the first round. But maybe but it's a losing game. And again, if you're that insecure as a judge, you shouldn't be judging at any level.
Well, my solution to bad judging is do what happened on my second live BKFC event, BKFC 17, is just have all the fights go to a finish.
That's right, man.
I judged one event in my life, probably about 99 or so, and every fight went to a finish. So made it easy. Real easy, and I go down as a great judge and never had to put my name on anything. But
easy money, easy money. I mean, and the thing is too is there were some great referees and great judges in this sport who no longer work, and some of them retired or they just lost interest. And I'm not going to name names. I don't want to embarrass anybody, but we can all figure out who some of these people are.
Yeah.
They did not keep up with the sport. They didn't go to training. I can tell you that happened in Kansas. We had a very senior referee, and he failed the referee's test, and man, he failed it badly.
Wow.
Did I
not keeping up with the training, and you have to train. So many athletic commissions award good attendance or seniority, and that's a horrible criteria on both counts.
Speaking of BKFC and refereeing, was there during the Camus O'Bannon fight?
Right.
Did I, obviously being in the crowd during that ruck, I mean, that was one of the craziest fights. I told Camus he was probably the toughest fighter I've ever seen in 200 plus live events that I've attended. What did the referee just lose count? Did he not know that there was, because in BKFC there is a 3 knockdown per round rule, correct?
No, there's not.
Oh, there's not. There's not. So it was an actual corner stoppage.
Yeah, there were a few issues on that card. We had, I'm not going to name names on the referees, but you have a mandatory 8 count. People always get confused a mandatory 8 and a standing 8. Mandatory 8 is in boxing and in bare knuckle. If you go down, even if you're flashed and you're up at 1, the referee still counts to 8 seconds, then goes through the formality. Do you wish to continue? A standing 8, which pretty much exited the sport maybe 20 years ago, was pretty much gone by 2002, 2003. You would see it on lower level boxing. When I first started refereeing in the 90s, we had it. Guys would be taking punches. They would shell up. They would cover up. They weren't defending. The referee would just start counting and treat it as a knockdown. That doesn't exist in boxing anymore. There was an instance when a standing 8 was given when it shouldn't have been. There was an instance when the mandatory 8 wasn't counted out fully. But, I'll give slack because it's an evolving sport. It's so new. And you have people who have only refereed boxing, people who have only refereed MMA. I love the Alabama Commission. They're great, but it was the first time they'd ever had a bare knuckle show. So I'm not going to pick on anyone or beat up on anyone. Yeah. But there were just a few technical things. Thankfully, they did not affect the outcome. And as upset as we can all get as combat sports fans with refereeing and judging, if the outcome, meaning who won, who lost, wasn't affected, then at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. It's not great, and these are teachable moments where people need to get better. Yeah. But nothing impacted the outcome of the fight. But yeah, just technically, there were a couple of things there. But every referee on that card was really good, and I think they'll all be back.
So, just because you're talking about how passionate fight fans can be, everyone's got an opinion about certain refs, certain judges. There's also people that seem, at least lately, I'm noticing that have. I just want to know, from your point of view as a commentator, there's people that have opinions about how fights are called and commentated on.
Always, man. Always.
So I'm just wondering, I've never seen anybody have a poor opinion of the job you do. I think personally you do a great job.
Thank you.
Been watching you for a long time, and I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone that doesn't like what you do. I mean, which is probably why you do it almost everywhere.
Thank you.
But I'm like, how do you, if you have gotten stuff like that, and I just haven't seen it, like, how do you handle it? And then when you're home watching fights, I mean, of course, we're not asking you to throw anyone under the bus, but do you ever just say like, "Oh, come on, what are you saying over here?" Like,
yeah,
how do you separate
it? All the time. Yeah, it's really tough as a commentator.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll do this. I'm a big NFL fan. I'm a big soccer fan. I used to be a soccer commentator. And you hear things. You'll hear things. You go, "Wow, that was really good," or you hear things like, "Oh, it was kind of rough." People have their opinions. Fans, for whatever reason, my whole career, I'm gonna knock on wood some more, have been extremely nice to me. And maybe that's my Midwestern personality, that I never try to be the star. I love big personality color commentators. Chris Lytle has a great big personality. Jimmy Smith.
Mm-hmm.
The shows I've done with Boss Root, I think, have been so much fun. I do well with those people. So maybe because I don't try to be the center of attention, I'm kind of trying to orchestrate. I try to be the midfielder. I'll use soccer terminology. I'm trying to be the midfielder rather than the goal scorer, is what I'm looking to do. I'm trying to play that ball through and then have the number 9 put it in the back of the net. Maybe that's why. I don't know. People are very, very charitable and very nice to me. For whatever reason, I've never commentated the UFC. If I ever did, I don't think I will. But if I ever did, maybe people wouldn't be so nice. They seem to have stronger opinions. I'm friends with John Anik. I think John Anik does a great job.
He does.
And I see him getting beaten up online all the time. And maybe that's just the profile of the show. But what I like is the fact that you guys are fight guys. When I'm around fight people, be it fighters or hardcore fans or journalists or trainers or gym owners or managers, if they tell me that they dig what I do, then I feel like I'm onto something, because that's where I'm trying to go. And that probably led to my demise at Bellator after Bjorn Rebney left. There was a big philosophical shift. And I'm going to be me, and I'm going to try to be a fan, and I'm going to be passionate. I'm going to try to be knowledgeable on this too. I'm not going to play the everyman or play dumb or things I don't know. So I'm going to put forth that passion and being a lifelong fan and being a student of all of this stuff. And I hope people respond to it. I really feel blessed. I feel blessed in my career. I feel blessed that the nice notices I get. Even, after Triller, I had so many nice comments on that. And I'm very, very fortunate. I probably shouldn't think about it too much. Knock on wood again. I don't want to jinx myself, but no, I do appreciate the feedback is always so great from fans and from the fight community.
So is there ever an environment? I mean, you mentioned Triller, so I'm going to bring it up just because stuff came out from Frank Mir and I don't know if Cunningham said anything, but I know Frank Mir did a couple of interviews where it wasn't you, but it was De La Hoya and I forget the other gentleman that was trying to control the whole thing. I'm sorry, I forget his name. The other gentleman that was on the mic that night.
Let's see. Ray Flores was on. Al Bernstein.
Ray Flores is the one. So like Ray Flores was the one that was kind of trying to, if you rewatch it and you listen, I mean, you could tell he's trying to save what kind of stopped De La Hoya from doing whatever he was doing.
Ray was in it. I love Ray, and I'll tell you, Ray did an A++ job on that show, and he was put in a tough position on the De La Hoya situation.
Yeah. So I was just, I mean, that's kind of like what I was asking before about when you're saying, if you're not calling, you're sitting home and you see stuff like that. I mean, just your reaction to that. You just said it, but the other thing I wanted to ask you, I mean, your enthusiasm and everything you've told us about your history is, speaks for itself. So I'm pretty sure that I already know the answer to this, but from first fight to the last fight, especially when you did cards for Bellator, where like 13 fight cards and stuff like that, your energy seems to stay the same from the first fight to the very last fight. I mean, like, how do you prepare for a night like that? What do you do? Is it coffee? Green tea, like I mean, or
Diet Mountain Dew, my friend. Diet Mountain Dew.
Oh, okay. That's it?
Diet Mountain Dew. No, you know what? And you've hit on something that I take as much pride in my career is anything. is that I'm going to give you my best effort 100% from the first fight to the last fight. And I remember this is after Bjorn left at Bellator in the new regime. I'm not talking about Coker. I can talk about Coker, but not on this stuff specifically. It was the people at Spike at the time. And I remember them telling me, like, why are you interviewing the undercard fighters? Because they're fighting. I actually had a producer get my ear and say, why are you trying so hard on this fight? Because we're broadcasting it. So what? It's on spike.com. Mills Lane, the great boxing referee Mills Lane, is one of my personal heroes. I got to know him fairly well. When I was young and refereeing boxing starting out, I went to a bunch of his seminars. I remember seeing Mills Lane on a profile. It was ESPN or HBO or somewhere. And Mills Lane, they'd followed him, and he was doing a show in like nowhere, Nevada. And the reporter said, you know, you do the biggest world title fights, man. Why are you here? And he said, because to the two guys fighting, this is the most important fight in the world, and I'm going to treat it like that. And I do that. That's my philosophy. And whether I'm doing FAC on UFC Fight Pass, or if I'm doing Triller, which had 1.5 million buys, or when we did those Bellators where we got close to 2.5 million viewers, or these huge bare knuckles like Knuckle Mania. If you hire me, you're going to get my best job. And I'm a grown up. I can say no, and occasionally, not very often, but on occasion I will say no because I just don't feel that the promotion is quite right for me. I actually did that last week. It's pretty rare for me. It just didn't feel quite right to me. But if I say yes, you're going to get my best job. And so if it's prelim number 1 and it's pro debuter versus pro debuter, or if it's the main event and it's a world title fight, I'm going to be consistent. I'm going to do my best. And I think I'm going to hit that to give consistency. You know, there's so many things you can't control as a commentator. Can't control if people like you. You really can't control what your voice sounds like. You can work on your accent. I've got a pretty flat Midwest accent. You can work on your accent, but it's kind of who you are. You can control your effort. And I really take that to heart. So I'm going to give the same fighter meeting. I'm going to give the same prep. I'm going to give the same energy, the same passion, the same enthusiasm, the same everything I have, no matter where it is in the card. And I'll tell you, Bellator, 13, but Jimmy Smith and I come from M1 where we were doing 18 to 20 fights. So 13 felt like a vacation. When I commentated Affliction 1 with Jimmy Smith, we did the world feed on Affliction 1. Affliction 2, there was only one feed. It was the pay-per-view. It was Jimmy Tito Ortiz and me. But Affliction 1, the pay-per-view was McCarthy, Frank Trigg, and Jay Glazer. World feed is basically for everywhere else that's not the United States, taking an English language feed. And it was Jimmy Smith and me. And we're in the production meeting, and the producer's like, man, you know, they have you scheduled for 8 fights. That's way too many. You guys will be exhausted. And Jimmy and I are laughing like, we just did 22 fights in Tokyo 4 days ago. I think we can handle this workload. That's no problem. But I appreciate you noticing, and I appreciate you bringing that up because, you know, 2 things that I really pride myself on is the fact that I'm always neutral, even if I have very close friends in fights. And sometimes I have close friends fighting each other in fights. I'm neutral in that moment. I do not care who wins or loses. I'm just worried about giving, not worried, it's the wrong word. I'm efforting to give the absolute best performance that I can. Doesn't matter in every fight on that. And the other is the consistency, because I'm going to treat every fight the same. And by the same, I mean I'm going to give it my 100% effort.
You know, on top of that, every fighter basically that's come up in the last 15 years at some point was a prelim fighter.
Yeah,
you know?
100%.
So I mean, that's why, as a fan, I get it a lot. I go to fights left and right crazy, and I'm there 10 hour before the first fight starts. I don't miss a prelim because I don't want to be the guy who misses George St. Pierre on a prelim fight. I don't want to be, you know, Bellator example is I met Goiti Yamauchi, like it was his Bellator debut. He's walking around the Pachanga Casino, a bright-eyed, probably 20-year-old kid at the time. And just to see the look on his face when I asked for a photo with him, to shake his hand, tell him how great he fought. He kind of had broken English at that time. It's gotten better now, but he was, just see the look on his face, and you start to realize that. And now look at him. I mean, I think he lost a BS decision a couple weeks back, but he's on the precipice of becoming a superstar.
Oh, absolutely. No, man, I love that you say that. I'll tell you a story on Anthony Smith. I've gotten to be pretty close friends with Anthony Smith in real life. Anthony, I met him. He fought Brian Green on an undercard at Bellator, and I believe this was 2012. It's 2012 or 2013. And we're in Council Bluffs, Iowa, which is It's the Twin City of Omaha, just on the other side of the state line from Nebraska to Iowa. And Anthony and I, we just hit it off in the fighter meeting. And he's telling me about how his wife is pregnant with their first child, and he's going to do a gender reveal on the trunks. He's either going to be blue or pink, right? And it turned out to be a girl, and he wears the pink trunks. So I say this in the production meeting. They're like, who? I'm like, Anthony's, well, who's that? Well, he's on, why do we care? That's ridiculous. Next.
Wow.
It's Anthony Smith, you know?
Yeah. Wow.
That's, and last summer, my family, we were in Omaha. We went to the zoo with my wife and my kids, and then we wound up going to Anthony Smith's house and hanging out with his wife and kids. And he reminded me of that story. He's like, you know, you were the only guy who treated me with respect like anything. I was like, dude, whether you became one of the greatest light heavyweights in the UFC or not, it didn't matter. If that was your first and last fight, I would have treated you the same way. But everybody else on the press, like, well, what do we care? But had he been one of the top of the card guys, then they would have made a 20-minute long feature about the gender reveal. And man, there's too much of that in this sport. Is that here's what I hate. You know, when we return, this fighter is in the cage. Who's he fighting? You know, or at the top of the broadcast tonight on our main event, you'll see this guy. And as an opponent, even if it's an A side, B side, there's still another human being who probably has some pride, and they want to be talked about too. I hate that in combat sports. It's so obnoxious. I can tell you, most of the time, it's not the commentators; it's the promoter, or the producer.
Yeah, no, it's on my end of things too. I mean, sometimes I'll pitch to editors. I won't say because I write for a few places, so I won't throw anyone under the bus. But sometimes I'm just like, hey, I'm speaking with a fighter that's on the mid card at an LFA event, and they're like, yeah, no, we don't, because like, what do you mean LFA? What's you don't talk to any UFC fighters? And it's just like, well, where do you think these guys come from?
Right. I know. Yeah, it hasn't been since CM Punk that they had a pro debuter in the UFC, so they are coming from somewhere.
Yeah.
It's pretty maddening, actually, isn't it? It's just a level of disrespect, and
especially, I mean, I know you said you train too and stuff like that. I mean, I come from a gym that had a few fighters in Strikeforce, Elite XC, and even the UFC. So you see these guys from their beginning to when they get, all the work that they put in and stuff like that. And you wish that they got the shine that they're fighting for. I mean, not that they're fighting for that, but
right.
It's just like,
it's just giving them respect. It goes back to what Mills Lane said. To these two people, this is the most important fight in the world. And if we're there, and I'm putting my voice to it, and I'll tell more Bellator stories, but early days of Bellator, like 2010, I don't know. They probably put them in a dumpster and set them alight. I don't know what happened, but some of those Bellators, because if you remember in 2010, we were actually on Fox Sports Net on Thursday nights, and we would do 4, and sometimes we would squeeze in a swing in 5, but most of those cards had 9 or 10 fights, and Jimmy and I would put our voice on them. A lot of times they were dark prelims or post-lims right after the main event, and we would still voice them. And there would be people on the crew, never Bjorn Rebney, to his credit, I love Bjorn, but people on the crew like, why are you even trying? The show's over. Well, the answer is you're recording my voice. And maybe this person turns out to be a big star, like Michael Chandler started in one of those fights. Yeah. That's what happened. So do you want me to not try? And then it turns out to be Michael Chandler. But Michael Chandler fought a guy named Scott Stapp, not the lead singer of Creed, but another guy named Scott Stapp. And it was one of those dark fights in 2010. And he got a finish. And I treated it just like any other fight that I would treat. And then the next year he comes back and he wins the lightweight tournament. And then by November of that year, he beats Eddie Alvarez and wins the title. Yeah. But you're like, why would you try? Exactly. It's insane. You're right. It's like they think these guys just show up fully formed into a main event.
Yeah.
Did you now the first Bellator I attended was Bellator 10, and that was still when it was half Spanish, or it was almost all Spanish basically.
Right. It was.
Did you came along right after that, or were you a part of it when it was still Spanish?
So that was actually, and I don't even know if they called it on site, Sean Anik, and that's totally lost to history. John Anik and Jason Chambers, and I'm not sure they were ever on site. I could be wrong on this. They may have just called from studio because John was full-time at ESPN. It was an ESPN Deportes deal, And another loss to history was that it was going to be kind of what Combate Americas is. They had Lupe Contreras, not Michael C. Williams, as the ring announcer. They were pushing the envelope on Hispanic. Eddie Alvarez, who's from Philly, but he's Puerto Rican heritage. He was a Hispanic fighter. They pushed the envelope a little bit on that. And Brazilian somehow, even though they speak Portuguese, became Hispanic. I'm not sure how that worked.
Yeah,
but
I saw Tony Lopez get interviewed, and right. they made him do it in Spanish and then translated it in English for the crowd.
Exactly.
And I'm going. I just watched him fight last week at King of the Cage, and he fought. And he spoke perfectly. So.
From California, but so that was in 2009, and that was a mini season. And it's funny because the Bellator numbering is off. They did like a highlight show, and they numbered it. And I think they only did something like 8 events. And then they did 2 shows, but they released them, or they did 1 event, but they released it at 2 shows. So there was a lot of play going on with the numbering. I was with Jimmy Smith, and we were at M1, and it was such a fun gig. We were going basically to Europe or Asia every 3 weeks. And those shows were around the world. In the US, they were on HDNet. We would call all of these fights, and then they would go back and they would make 3 one-hour programs out of them. And they were everywhere. Like I had a friend who's a TV producer in Vietnam, and he turns on the TV, and there I am doing M1. Another buddy of mine's an architect. He's in Brazil, and there I am doing M1. They weren't that popular in the US, but they had a really good global reach. So I did that for 2 years. So in 2009, I heard that Bjorn Rebney was interested in Jimmy and me. And I looked into it, and I'm like, they're on ESPN Deportes. Like, I don't even know if the English language commentators are there. And like, I don't even know where the English aired, if it ever did. I should know that. Because this is 2009, so it's not like it was ESPN.com and there was no, ESPN Plus. I think they may have. I should ask Anik this. I don't
think there was an English broadcast. I couldn't find.
I know they employed Anik in Chambers, but it could have been they just called those for posterity, that they never actually aired anywhere.
Yeah, I feel like Anik did like Q&As, or he used to do something. Yeah. It was before like the main cell phone, smartphones. So
yeah,
exactly. He had like a mailbag where you could ask him about that week's Bellator events and stuff like that.
But it was Jorge Bribiesca, George X, who then wound up coming along, and Manny Rodriguez, who came and who were the lead, and then they came along when we switched. But in the fall of 2009, I got cold called by Bjorn Rebney, and I knew who he was. And he said, "I'm really interested in bringing you and Jimmy over." And Jerry Millen, who had hired me at Pride, who's another great guy, one of my best friends, guy I owed a huge part of my career to, he had taken me to M1. And I went to Jerry, and I'm like, "What do you think?" And he said, "Man," he said, "I don't know if there's a future in M1. I think they're losing a lot of money." He said, "You guys got to go take this. I'm not going to hold you back. You and Jimmy have to take this." And I signed my deal first. I'm not sure why, because he wanted us at the same time, but I remember I signed my deal first. And then I had to be coy. Like, I couldn't say it was Jimmy, but everybody knew it was. But for some reason, I don't know why it was taking longer with Jimmy, because I know they wanted Jimmy as much or more than me. But they finally got us signed. Jimmy and I did our last show the week of Christmas in St. Petersburg, Russia. And then like the week after New Year's, there was a Bellator seminar. We were in Saratoga Springs, New York. And then Bellator 13, which was, I believe, April 6, 2010, Joe Warren fought on that card. That was at the Seminole Hard Rock in Hollywood, Florida, just outside of Fort Lauderdale. That was my first Bellator. People misremember that as being the first Bellator ever, but that's the first Bellator in English, and it was on Fox Sports Net, and it was the first one that got a lot of coverage.
I guess we're starting to get late on time here. And, as a fan, I have one more. I wanted to ask more about Fedor, but maybe we'll catch up on a later show.
Yeah, no, we need to do this again. This is outstanding.
Yeah. So for me as a fan, there's been a few times in my life where I've been at events and I've seen something, and all of a sudden it's just like, I can't believe I'm getting to witness this. For me, it was ringside for Fedor versus Brett Rogers in Chicago. I had third row seats, and it was the first. No, that was after the Affliction. So I had seen Fedor fight a couple times in person.
Right.
But this was the first time I was actually at a ringside seat. And just to be there, I just felt like this is it. This is as good as as a fight fan. This is as good as it's ever going to get for me. Was there ever a moment? What was the first moment you, as a broadcaster, had something happen where maybe it was someone you met, or maybe it was a fight that was taking place? Maybe it was Chandler Alvarez won. But what was there a moment when you were broadcasting where it was like, this is it, this is great, I can't believe I'm actually getting to do this, and for you, someone's paying you to do it and you get to be a part of it? Was there ever a moment like that, or something that sticks out?
Yeah, man, and that's a great question. I love that question. Yeah, it was when I got hired by Pride, and it was the very end of Pride, and Mauro Ranello had left, and they cycled through a lot of different people. I think Damon Perry was one. I think Lon McCarran. There's some other people who I don't even remember. And Jerry Millen, who I referenced earlier, Jerry Millen hired me and took a chance on me. And I had done some soccer. I mean, I'd actually done soccer for ESPN and Fox Soccer Channel. So I wasn't completely unknown, but I was completely unknown in the combat sports industry. All I had done in fighting, other than my refereeing for boxing at $50 and $100 a pop, was Joe Kelly's Titan Fighting Championship. Not the Titan now, Joe sold it, but it was a Kansas City promotion. A lot of guys who went on to big careers like Bobby Volker and Rob Kimmons and LC Davis came through Titan. And I did Titan on Metro Sports Television, which was basically cable access in Kansas City. And I used that reel to attract the attention of Jerry Millen. And I met up with him in LA, and he hired me in LA. And when I just being in Japan, for a kid from Shawnee, Kansas, being in Japan was pretty surreal. I had traveled a little bit, but that was my first time in Asia. And that was amazing. And at Saitama Super Arena, again, it's the end of Pride, so there were 30,000 people there, not 90,000, but still 30,000.
Yeah.
And in that era, as much as I love the UFC, in that era, 2005, 6, 7, I was more in love with Pride.
Oh,
so
yeah.
oh my God, Ricardo Arona, I'm actually commentating. I remember Vanderlei Silva wasn't on the card, but he pulled up out front. And I'm like, wow, that's Vanderlei Silva. Like all these fanboy moments. Yeah. And I was a huge Trig fan, and now I'm working with Trig, with Frank Trigg. That was that moment for me. Like, wow, I cannot believe that all of these things. I'm commentating Pride. I'm in Japan. I'm meeting all these guys who I completely idolize. That was an insane moment for me.
Yeah, awesome. That would be it for me too. Not for nothing. I mean, literally on the side over here, I have all the Pride events in a box, all on DVD, and people are like, oh, why don't you resell them? I mean, but it's just like, to me, that was like one of the greatest of the sport. I mean, I know the sport's continuing and it's growing, and I guess it's bigger now than it was back then, but for me, something about that whole thing. So I mean, that's I'm not surprised that that's your moment. But I mean, before we close out, if there's anything you want to plug, I mean, the book, a podcast, anything you got going on, let folks know where to follow you and all of that.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So my 15-year-old daughter, Ellie, runs my Instagram. She's doing really well. I think it says Sean Wheelock Official. She's doing much better on than I ever could. Get a 15-year-old child in your life to run your social media. That definitely helps. What I always like to plug is the book that I co-wrote with Art Davie. It's called Is This Legal? Again, I wish I could say more. I really can't, but we're getting close to announcing it. It is a major studio pick. No disrespect to Showtime Extreme, but it's not going to be Showtime Extreme with Tom Sizemore. No disrespect. I shouldn't be snarky. I'm from Kansas. I really shouldn't be snarky. Tom Sizemore's had a good career, but it's going to be pretty cool. But if you want to get a copy of the book, I'm going to hook you guys up. But if you're watching, you can get a copy. You can get an autographed copy from Art. For some unknown reason, you want my autograph, I'll do it as well. But we control the inventory right now. You can find it on Amazon and still in Barnes & Noble, but the best price is directly through us. It's isthislegalthebook.com, isthislegalthebook.com. You can get a book. You can just get a standard book. We do breaks on orders of 20, which a lot of people do. A lot of promoters actually will buy a case of 20 and they'll do them as giveaways. You can get the autographs from Art and myself if you want. But isthislegalthebook.com. And again, that tells the 4-year story, 89 through 93. This guy who was an advertising executive named Art Davie, who was in his 40s and just divorced for the 3rd time, spent his life savings and had a dream and created something that turned out to be the Ultimate Fighting Championship.
Cool. We'll drop a link too in the podcast description.
I appreciate that.
YouTube. Yeah.
Fans can follow us at Combat Hour on Twitter, Coast to Coast Combat Hour on Instagram. Follow me, Matthew Hawkins, at MMA Hawk 21 on Twitter and Instagram. Follow Ed at Carbazol on Twitter, Carbeerzol on Instagram, and Old Head Carb on Twitch. The great Sean Wheelock. I do this as a fan. Luckily me and Ed get to do this, and we get to talk to some great people in this sport. I can tell you right now, this is one of the best, my favorite shows. Getting a chance to talk to somebody who's seen what you've done, as professional as you are. I look forward to maybe having another conversations down the line, much like this. And I could go on for days with all the questions I have, but I just want to thank you for coming on, giving us your time, and look forward to your next thing. Do you have an event coming up? I know BKFC is kind of in limbo a little bit, maybe June 18th in Miami.
Yeah, I have Lion Fights, so that will be on Friday the 21st of May on UFC Fight Pass. And then I have a Roy Jones Jr. Boxing. I believe that's June 10th. And then the next night, Icon MMA. Amanda Serrano, no disrespect to Clarissa Shields, but the greatest pound-for-pound female fighter, is going to be an MMA on that card. Those two are on UFC Fight Pass. Triller the week after that, and then waiting for confirmation on BKFC. But some big things are coming with BKFC in June.
Awesome. Well, everybody support, buy the book, and thanks again, Sean. Really appreciate the conversation.
Matt, you guys are awesome. Anytime, let's definitely do this again. Phenomenal questions. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for the kind words.
All right.